Okay, so I took a quick look and I found that there's a couple more things that we could do to add. The first one is we need to add the door, the door which is going to seal rather than the door that's going to open. We need to actually make the particles do something rather than just flop. And we also need to make the level restart once the player's died. So let's start with the door. So I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to click duplicate. It's quite nice once you've got your core structure of your closing. Once you've got your core structure of your actor down, you could then make variants of it just by kind of tweaking the code a little bit. In particular with things like enemies, that's something that happens quite often. So now I'm going to change the naming of this. So that your first animation is going to be open. And that isn't actually going to have any animation. Sorry, well, it's not going to be visible, and it's going to have no collision. The reason being is so you can pass through it, otherwise it'll block the corridor. I'll show you where we're going to put them. So they're going to go at either entrance of the tunnel like that. I'm just going to quickly save that. So I'm just going to very quickly show you how to edit a file. So I'm going to double click on it and click edit image. All I need to do is actually remove any kind of image from it. So I've just deleted all of the content within it, so it's just transparent. And then I've pressed save, well, Control and S, and that's taken me back to Stencyl and it's made the changes I want. If you don't click save in Photoshop before you close the Stencyl file, what will happen is it won't update the actual file itself. So now what I've got to do is I'm going to do change this from opening to closing. And what I'm going to do in here is change this section of code to closing in its naming. And that should pretty much run exactly the same, except in this case we don't actually want to kill the actor because we want it to stay there permanently so the player can't escape. Now the only other thing we want to do now is reverse this animation, because otherwise it's going to open. Yeah, it's going to go from being open to suddenly it being full and a different color to being closed. So yeah, that should now play in reverse, and once you've kind of collided with the button it should seal them. Now one thing that is kind of almost like malicious, almost, I don't know what the term is, but one thing that tends to happen in a lot of things like Indiana Jones or things like that, you have like a bit of spacing in between like events happening. So you know your doors will close first on the sides, and then some kind of giant thing will come down and squash you, rather than them all happening at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my door and I'm going to add a slightly longer delay on this stuff happening. So I'm going to say wait 1.5 seconds for this to kick in. And then the only other thing I'm going to do is that I'm aware that these, the ones on the sides of the actual corridor rather than the ones at the top here, they're facing the same way, whilst I'd actually prefer them to open something like this. So they're kind of sealing vertically rather than horizontally, which as you've just seen here is just a matter of changing it from facing upwards to changing it, shifting it counterclockwise or clockwise. So now what should happen is when you press the button, the doors on the side will close first. There'll be a pause of 1.5 seconds, and then the doors at the top should open, releasing the giant smashing blocks. So other than particles, the only thing left to do after that would be having the actual level restart once you've been killed, and maybe a screen shake effect once you've been hit. So let's just see how this plays out. So let's plod along. See how I wasn't able to collide with the and I can't escape from this little thing here, which is intentional. So the doors seal on top and then get squashed, which is great. So what I'm going to add to this here is I'm going to add a bit of screen shake to my player. So that'll probably last half a second with reasonably high intensity. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mess with these particles that I've produced. So for that, what I'm going to do is, when created, I'm going to make them choose a specific direction to fly in. I'm going to let them be affected by gravity, so you kind of have like a flying around effect rather than letting them just fly off in lots of different directions. So I'm going to set a random number between, let me think, 0 and -180. Now this might seem like very peculiar numbers to use, but I just need to quickly explain something to you, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, but better late than never, I guess. Okay, so in Stencyl, I'll have to have a look into the reason why they do it this way, but the way that they do angles, sorry, it's the worst circle drawn ever, is usually you have 0, 90, 180, 270, and then 360. But in Stencyl what you have is everything is shifted 90 degrees essentially, just to make things easy. So yeah, so the reason I'd chosen 0 to -180 is because that essentially gives us this radius here for the little kind of bits to be fired out in. So they could fly off in any direction within this space. Okay. So let's go back to Stencyl, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a variable speed. So probably set it to maybe 10, between 10 and 90. What I'm going to do as well is I want to kind of change some variables. So if you remember earlier that I gave them names each. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to draw, and I'm going to choose an animation. That animation is going to be set between a random number between 1 and 4. Now you can see if I try and connect this to here, it's not going to work. So what I need to do is I want to make sure that there's this section of code in here which basically translates anything into a name for an animation. You can also find it under draw, and just beneath where you can find your switching animation piece of code. What I also want to do is I want to set a random direction for my projectile, or my particle. And what else would I like to do? Let's set a random turning speed as well, so it'll kind of like spin off as it's been and I'll make it a random number between negative 360 and 360, so it'll kind of spiral off into the air. And then other than that, no, that should be good. I'll quickly give it a test to see if it is alright, but I'm pretty sure that's everything. What I'll do last but not least before we test it is I'm gonna add an event in scene, and that event is going to be once the character's died, restart the level. So when an actor of type, so the player, is killed, we're going to fade to black over a second and then reload over half a second. So now if I test this, it should restart the level, and obviously have all the cool effects that we've applied during that time period. There might be some kind of little tweaks and refinements that we could do with, but we'll find those out in a sec. But for the most part, I think we've just about kind of wrapped up this tutorial. So let's see what we've got. So wandering around, just kind of hop down. Cool. So maybe a little bit longer to kind of revel in what's happened, but other than that, it seems to work pretty good. Great. So let's just very quickly, under time, give that a 1 second delay. And then other than that, let's go to settings and let's make it full screen. It's just something new to show you. So if you come onto these settings here, you can set the scaling method that you want. If you want it to start in full screen, you'll tick this little tick here. And I'm going to stretch it to fit the screen, and let's see how that goes. So let's give that a quick test, and I think this should be it. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and yeah, the next tutorials that I'm going to be covering are going to be because there was quite a few requests for it, I'm going to do a top-down shooter. And kind of dealing with needing to launch something in lots of different directions. I'm also going to look into having things that are activated when you're within a certain range of something. So, for example, a light that turns off on when you're within range, or something along those lines. Cool. And as for this tutorial, if you're looking for the resources, I'm going to put them all online as well, so you can access those. If you're wanting to kind of look at the code that I've produced for this, and I'll put in the example project online for people to mess around with if they want. Other than that, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and keep an eye out for some ones coming up real soon. Okay.